The Steel Conference has been a very successful event for the last 11 years, and I will have the pleasure of putting up my insight into the construction sector. In this presentation, I will briefly start with an introduction of the Turkish Union of Contractors, and then we'll discuss about the new recent developments and expectations for the contracting business in Turkey. If you ask me why the Turkish Union of Contractors, I would like to say that in Turkey we have more than 300,000 contractors in Turkey. Just to give you an idea about the position of the union in the Turkish industry, I would like to say that we have 138 members who are working for the 70% of local and 90% of international business.
Sektörü hakkında genel bir takım kriterler.
Now, I will give you some criteria for the construction sector. You know, the share of the construction industry in the GDP is 6%. And speaking of the global scale, the construction sector is at the range of 10 to 12%. Therefore, there is still a way that the construction sector can go locally. Also, a different feature of the construction sector is, together with the other sectors that it's been supporting, it has almost a 30% contribution to the GDP. This corresponds to 8.5% of the non-agricultural employment. Therefore, it has an employment capacity for more than 1.8 million people. As previously discussed, in this down times, countries consider construction sector as a pushing power, which is the case for Turkey as well. Therefore, the construction industry is going to propel the economy, and at the same time will become a shield against social crises. Now, what is the relationship of the construction sector with economy? Just except for some exceptional years, the construction industry has always been considered as an industry to push the national economy. The exception to that was in 2014 and 15, with the basic reason of first, in 2014, there was a decline in the public investments, followed by this decline of the private sector investments in 2015. Going back to this slide, you can see that in 2016, there was a reinstatement of the classical position. Therefore, both in the public sector and the private sector, there was a reacceleration of the investments. Therefore, this year in 2016, construction has again gained its potential to be the pushing power of economy. Now, what will happen in 2017 and afterwards? Now, as Başak discussed, the automotive sector will become a very successful sector, but we have to divide this assumption into two for construction, because there can be some problems in terms of international or foreign contracting activities. But on the contrary, in 2017, there is a good potential that the local construction sector will be even developing in Turkey. But we have to keep in mind that in Turkey, with the current situation, it's quite hard to make an assumption. What is really important, if you ask me, is to have economic stability, or in other words, to lead to sustainable growth. When everything is in a dust cloud, it might be very challenging to make an assumption for the future. Of course, there are some changes that we've been going through, but in time, sustainable construction techniques, smart and green buildings, responding to social needs, proper planning for the commercial buildings have all laid the ground for the future projects. And also large-scale infrastructure projects, urban transformation projects have led to significant business potential within the industry. Now, particularly speaking for the infrastructure, we as the Union of Contractors care about the large-scale infrastructure projects. For instance, Osman Gazi Bridge, Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge have been constructed. The third pillar is still underway. Soon there will be the Dardanelles Bridge to be constructed. Also, high-speed trains, subways, airport constructions. We do expect to be the pushing power for the sector. But the main problem, if you ask me, for the construction sector is, of course, there is no chance of funding the projects from the state budget. Therefore, alternative financial models should be implemented. As is the situation today, there will be a PPP project to undertake the financing risks. But particularly in this fluctuating environment, it's really another challenge to have an effective implementation of this model. Probably at least it will be costly for Turkey to implement the models. Therefore, in the coming period, such mega projects will have to be funded and arranged within the framework of an action plan so that the realistic and updated feasibilities can play a role. Also, in the new period, there is the expectation for Turkey to grow a new growth, production, and funding model so that we can sustain the confidence. Together with this financial environment, what is important is to achieve this sustainability. Another important field of activity for the civil sector or for the construction sector is international contracting services. This is important not only in terms of its support for exporting the construction materials, but also in terms of supporting employment. In other words, it is important to provide the labor from the budget of other countries, creating alternative markets for construction materials. Therefore, not only the local projects, but also international projects do matter for the survival of the construction sector. We made a search conference. Therefore, we concentrated on the motto of creating a Turkish contracting brand that will be the leader in its region and that will undertake innovations globally. Turkish contracting companies currently are working in 110 countries in over 9,000 projects with a total business volume of 332 billion US dollars, as the distribution shown on this map. How about international fields of activity up until 2030? There was a projection study conducted for the period to cover from 2014 through 2030. After 2025, infrastructure environment will be evolving faster globally, according to the forecast. Now, taking a look at the global market, here I'm taking into consideration the global population because particularly in Africa, there will be a potential of growing population. Most of the population is expected to grow in underdeveloped and developing countries. Global civic market is growing its potential every year, whereas the international construction market is pushing the borders of the countries accordingly. The global construction market, which is 6.9 currently, will probably go beyond 8.5 billion US dollars by 2030, and the global construction market will amount to 15.5 trillion US dollars. The share of the Turkish companies is expected to grow from 3% from its current position. It's just going to reach 4.6 in the near future, but will climb to 7% with the impact of the shifting of the Turkish companies to more know-how projects such as airport or light rail projects. Therefore, we are also showing more presence in the international construction market. The target is to yield an extra 50 billion US dollar worth of a new contracting potential. Therefore, the goal is to increase the potential up to 7%. When we take a look at the top 250 contracting companies, Turkey, as you can see, ranks the second according to the number of companies present in this top 250 list. Turkey follows China in the list, and you can see Spain comes lower down on the list. But this graph is all somehow depressing, because this was the chart that we were proud of until 2014. We were just positioning ourselves in the band of 30 billion US dollars, but after the downturn and also volatility in the international markets, we've experienced a significant decline in 2016, as you can see. The root cause behind that is Russia, Libya, and Iraq lost their potential because Turkish companies were mostly working in these three countries. Following the stagnation in these three countries, and of course the political turmoil stopped in these countries, but there was also a decline implication in energy investments. Therefore, natural gas and oil prices declined in these countries, leading to a stagnation in the investments in these countries. Saudi Arabia, for instance, suspended 270 billion US dollar worth of investments. For the first time, they've disclosed a minus budget. Actually, the international contracting companies had to face a certain level of risk. As this was the tendency internationally, engineering, procurement, and construction, or the EPC system, has started to emerge as an integrated project management. This way, EPC plus F finance also was added into the picture. Therefore, within the entire contracting picture that our contractors were targeting, it's just become a big challenge to get a 7% share in this sector by 2030, because then you will have to add in finance to this integrated perspective. Not only EPC would suffice, but also F aspect would need to be added into this range of services. Therefore, China, Japan, and Western countries, for instance, are going to provide cheap credits for financing the projects in these countries. This is what Turkey has to do. I mean, you shouldn't just consider this from the perspective of contracting, but as a complete range of services, including material supply and finance. Therefore, this will be the critical point of differentiation, I think, in achieving this goal. In other words, if we want to become an exporter of the service finance, then we should be also in the position of creating financial instruments. Also, Turkey needs a new formation or a new strategy. We should be growing the scale of companies, as I said. The top 250 companies also 4 or 5 French companies, but they have more turnover than the total of the Turkish companies. Therefore, mergers are needed. Also, contracting investment should be provided on a broad range of services in an integrated system so that we can work for high added value projects. To be able to do that, of course, the branding concept has been initiated amongst international companies. These companies have become an international brand. Airports have played a big role there, both in terms of operator and investor. Also, rail services. Turkish companies are quite successful in the rail systems. Also, ports, networking, roads, highways. Transport systems are again the systems that Turkish companies have also worked as an investor and as a service provider. You know that Gamma ranks amongst the top companies, or congress centers, also sports facilities, particularly in Middle East, have become quite important. For instance, in Qatar, stadium projects were built quite successfully. Us or other countries or the African countries are just hosting delegations in this respect. This is all I can say about the construction sector. If you have any question, of course, I would be pleased to answer. Thank you.
Salim Bey'in sorusu var. Salim Metin Korbus.
From Korbus Çelik, Salim Metin. Thank you for this presentation. As I understand, there is a glamorous phase of international contracting. Linking this with steel, I would like to ask a question to you. Particularly in Africa, we have many offices as the company, and when we try to sell supplies there, like the construction profile materials, there is a barrier that we have to face. Which is this? Mostly in the African market, Chinese contractors are quite active and they are quite present in that market. When we offer them our supplies, they would respond that they have already purchased from China, paying locally to the Chinese suppliers. If you go to the Turkish contractors or other contracting companies that are also being offered Turkish steel, they reply the same, that they are buying from other markets. By the way, there are many, of course, companies. We are present in these international markets actively. So the question that boils down is, in Turkey, Yavuz Sultan Selim bridge was built with the Korean steel. There was no Turkish steel in the bridge. Turkish contractors integrated Korean steel suppliers into the scheme. But in the contracting sectors, the Turks are quite successful. There is lack of communication with the Turkish construction companies. You also referred to the financial aspect. Is it possible, maybe through Exim Bank or some other systems, can we develop some common schemes with the Turkish contractors based on payment possibilities in Turkey? Now that billions of US dollars worth of projects are being done, undertaken by Turkish contractors, do you have a project to run with the steel suppliers in Turkey? Thank you. It's been quite wise to bring this up, and Veysel also referred to that. I just was telling to myself, probably we should get together after this meeting to bring the two sides together, because from time to time with Veysel and their group, we bring the contracting companies with steel producers for the exchange of opinion. Maybe it would be better if we can do it in a more efficient way, so that the two sectors can be brought together again and again. And the same was also emphasized in his presentation. Why don't we use the Turkish steel in our projects? I'm not a contractor myself, so I don't want to mislead you, but I think the guiding principle is price. Everything is based on pricing. I mean, how can we just attract the attention of the contractors to local production? We can do it by bringing together both sides to find an answer to the question why. How we can just make it as a huge potential for local suppliers. After the answer is given to the question why, we should be working on the question how. We've done it from time to time, but there was, I think, a lack of continuum for these meetings. Probably we need to work on this mutual communication more. Thank you. Of course, we would be pleased to have a series of these meetings with your side. Do we have any further question, please? Murat Kula from Erdemir, sales director for the projects. Actually, we should also be working with the mediators, the steel users who are serving as a mediator, I mean, in both ways. We are selling to them as well. But indirectly, we are familiar with the problems that the contracting companies are going through. You said that roughly there are 300,000 contractors, but you have 138 members. And these are the top 138 serving to 70% of the sector. What I see is then, when there is any kind of infrastructure project, there is a cost attached to it. The contractors start with a prices a lot under its actual cost, maybe because of the intensive competition. And then for the pipes or steels and ironwork or the materials to be used in construction, maybe there is something lacking there, because maybe it's because of the high number of the contractors, and this also pushes us a lot, because you would sometimes see incredible prices going on, and the prices are set around the globe, but I sometimes see companies asking for raw material under $100. Do you think there is a potential for consolidation? Because there are really a lot of companies. Maybe it is, I don't know if it's really because of the high pressure of competition. Maybe it's because of lack of awareness about the future of the market. Do you think that we can create a platform where people can truly communicate? Because if the prices is around 500, the offer is just to buy items for 400, 450. Either they're in a challenging position because they've undertaken the project with low prices, or they're not aware of the markets. Maybe it's because of the miscalculations. If the contractor was assigned a project with the TL, the foreign currency rate is increasing, and at the end of the day, the company gets into a bottleneck financially, and then the project suspended, will be retendered. So I think it's totally a loss for the country. Can we have a better coordination? I have to ask you then, I mean, how many hours I have to speak? The members of the contractors union has this big problem. I think this is the biggest problem. This is extremely low offer proposals, and we're trying to cope with it, but unfortunately we fail. For instance, for complying with the EU, the public procurement law was written according to a questioning of price. I mean, there are so many, reasons to it. It's not just based on a single reason, but make sure that it's not because they don't know about the market. They're very much aware of the market. They have to get the contract with extremely low prices. They get the contract, and then they have to go ask for suppliers who can just produce 14 cubic millimeters of iron rather than 16. There is a lot of abuse in the system, and many of our members opt to not to take any assignment or any contract other than investment projects. But as the Turkish Union of Contractors, we've been dealing with this problem for a while. The administrations have to calculate this approximate cost properly. But how can they? I mean, let's say last year the dam was an average produced with this, and 20% of less is taken for the approximate cost. Therefore, between the offers and the approximate cost, there would be a gap. If you just give your offer or proposal much higher than the approximate cost, it would be impossible for you to get the contract. And there are so many contractors. Our suggestion is, and the Public Procurement Authority finally agreed to it, the surety bond. The surety bond system should be started in Turkey so that there is an insurance for the proposal. If this, I mean, there is some problem, even if the company wants to submit low prices or offers, we'll have to go to the insurance company, and the insurance company will make a proper analysis of the functioning of the system. Therefore, they would say you cannot do this work with that price, and I cannot cover you with the insurance, and there will be an amazing and incredible amount of insurance coverage premium. This is how the US solved the problem. Otherwise, there will be extremely low prices, half-finished contracts, and United States overcome the problem with the surety bond. The guarantees, again, will be, I mean, this will be one of the guarantees to be acceptable by the Public Procurement Authority. Therefore, let's say the DG for Insurance under the Ministry, Undersecretariat for Treasury will be working on it. But by using these kind of models, we can just improve the situation. It's not about not being knowledgeable about the sector. Everybody is knowledgeable about the sector, and we're making calculations probably. But if we're speaking about iron prices, and if there is some volatility in the international markets, the pipe works probably will be problematic. If there is a, for instance, a steep up in the cement prices, then the price markup would be a request to be raised. Therefore, we need some self-discipline for the market, which I think can be guaranteed by a third party like the insurance, because the letter of guarantees would not also suffice, because if you have sufficient amount of immovable property, the bank would consider the feasibility and everything. You would show your immovable property as guarantee and will get the letter of guarantee. And the Public Procurement Authority just keeps this threshold quite low, and then will question the extremely low proposals. And then they would say, I had some cement available already stocked up in my warehouse, and I'm going to use it. I think the public, especially in times when you have to make up a speedy decision, will have to consider all of this. I mean, in time, I mean, people were just complimenting each other for 40%, for instance, cutoff of the prices. Now, it is not possible to have extremely low prices. If the extremely low price is 120, then you will have to question, I mean, all the proposers under the list. Therefore, within the framework of the law for harmonization with the EU, it was not acceptable. I have another question, quite brief. There are some major infrastructure projects ahead of Turkey with some different dynamics. But of course, at least if you ask me the funding, where will that funding come from if it's a local project? Because in some projects there is the condition for local content. You as the union, have you been working on it? I mean, just saying out loud. In the Public Procurement Authority, there is the share of 15% of encouragement or price advantage for local content. but it's not very much used in contracting services. Because at the end of the day it's a service, but in the not for works but for goods it can be used effectively. I mean, EPCF, I think, should also be applicable together with the manufacturers. And the same is true for technical consultancy. The technical consultancy sector also is at stake in Turkey because of the scale differences. Now that they are weak when compared to international competitors, when they are allowed to work so freely, as you say, for steel, for instance, it shouldn't be that free from abroad. And the same is true for the technical consultancy services. It shouldn't be that open. And maybe we're trying to lead an unnecessarily liberal economy. Therefore, the slide also meant for that. EPC is going to meet the needs of Turkey together with the technical engineering service providers and the suppliers. I think this is a joint system that needs to be followed by all the parties together. And also, as the Exim, for instance, the facilities should be increased as we advocate. I don't know if I'm going beyond my time limit, but what do the Chinese do? They go and they find some soft loans, for instance, if necessary, free of interest, and they then go and sell their items. They fulfill all the engineering services, and this is what the Europeans also do. Otherwise, in contracting, Turkey has reached a threshold such as Turquality, and this, I think, will be, if it's going to be a 3-year project, high-risk project, for instance, particularly for undeveloped, underdeveloped, or developing countries. If we can merge this with engineering services, materials exports plus know-how, you would get the essential contribution. If you're going to operate the port, and it shouldn't be only about constructing the port, and then you should be using the oars, and then they would win, so that Turkey will have a long-term gain. So we should have a combined approach there. Unfortunately, we don't have, for instance, a Samsung, or we don't work as Korea or as Japan, because in Japan they have the International Union for Contractors, but they are getting assisted by the state. We don't have that in Turkey, so the sectors will have to cooperate with each other in a long-term basis. For a penetration into the market, it's not about getting 2-3 projects or selling your items just twice or 3 times, but being there for a long time. Thank you very much.